If you're struggling with your podcasting data, you're definitely not alone. Often it's hard to bring it all together from the different platforms. And that's exactly what Bumper is designed to do. The Bumper dashboard brings together your Apple Podcast stats, your Spotify for Creators stats, your YouTube stats, all into one dashboard to let you see exactly how your podcast is doing, track the trends, and actually dig in and see how well individual episodes, how individual types of content are doing so you can improve your show over time. So let's take a look at the Bumper dashboard, what's in there, and how can you use it. All right, let's jump straight into Podcraft. This is our show on how to run a successful podcast. And you can see I have lots of data in here to have a look at. So I have Apple Podcasts, I have Spotify, and I have YouTube all connected up. So that's the three main channels that Bumper draws out data for. So tons to dig into here. So top line, we have all-time verified listeners. So that is the deduplicated individuals who have listened to your podcast over time. We have all-time playback. So this is the total plays for this podcast as well. This is pretty recent data for Podcraft, actually. Our show's been running for 15 years, but we only changed it over to new hosting in the last year or so. So these are more recent numbers. But the all-time playback, for Apple Podcasts, it actually just shows listeners per day. So that's the only way they can get actual plays from Apple Podcasts, whereas Spotify actually has a plays metric, as does YouTube, as you'll probably know. Then we've got all-time listen and watch time, so it's good to see your all-time watch time, listen time creep up as well. And then we've got downloads here if you connect up your actual host. So if you do have a host that connects to Bumper Dashboard, you can actually get the downloads direct from your host here. But I'll show you our hosting stats for Podcraft so you can compare and see how the numbers here compare to overall stats. But moving on down, next we have release cadence. So just to say at the top here, you can set just about any kind of time period. So we have custom, you can choose your own time period. But I've got last 7, 14, 90. You can choose any time period you like. I'm looking at the last 3 months here, displaying daily. I can change that to weekly or monthly as well, just to see that kind of release period. For example, go to 12 months here, and you can see the release cadence by month. So really nice to be able to see the data in all sorts of formats. Let's bring it back to weekly, go to 90 days and have a look through these. So release cadence shows, this helps you see your consistency. So we can see we've released an episode just about every week, missed one there, but mostly every week. So that's nice to see that. Verified listeners is one of the better metrics in here. You can see your verified listeners. This is the individuals that are listening to your episodes. So this is always a really good metric for seeing your growth. If I take this from daily kind of gives you the nice spike, so you can see how many people have listened on those first days of release. But actually weekly and monthly gives you a better idea of growth. So if I actually change that to monthly, you can start to see whether it's trending up, and especially if you take it over that longer period of time. So we can see where we're growing quite nicely through to January, February there, but we've had a bit of a dip, March, April, and May. And of course, it splits it up into verified listeners for Apple Podcasts and for Spotify. So you can see for our audience, we have more verified listeners for Apple Podcasts. There's 162 on that episode versus 98 for Spotify. So we're something like 2/3 Apple Podcasts versus 1/3 Spotify. So we can see maybe that sort of indicates what type of audience we have, or maybe it indicates that we could do a bit more promotion around Spotify to try and help it catch up with Apple Podcasts. Playback's a really nice metric down here. Shows the proportion as well. So this is plays rather than verified listeners. This was our listeners, but this is plays. And we can see that actually evens out a little bit. We get more plays on Spotify versus the kind of proportion of listeners. Equally, our YouTube plays have been creeping up as well as we've tried to put more onto YouTube. So I love this graph for the fact that it helps you see really what platforms are trending, how they're trending. Really gives me an indication that the work we've put in on putting this out on YouTube, custom thumbnails for it, which I'll show you in just a little while. We can see that in here too, have actually paid off a little bit. Our YouTube proportions are creeping up, so that's quite nice to see. Listen and watch time. We can see here, though, that despite those higher YouTube views, the watch time is still pretty minuscule compared to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We can see actually Apple Podcasts has a higher listen time by a fair chunk, whereas Spotify, that probably reflects the listener proportions here pretty well. And then we've got YouTube up here, which is a bit smaller as well. So we see a really nice little indication there of really where people are spending their time, which one of your listeners, whether it's Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, are really giving you the most watch time. And then we have followers. So we can see the trend in our followers right here, gaining more Spotify followers here versus Apple Podcasts. So this can give you a really good indication of where to spend your time, or it can give you an indication of whether your campaigns are working. If you're spending time promoting on Spotify in particular, if that followers gained and lost isn't really indicating that, maybe there's something wrong with that campaign. Hopefully it's showing you good payoff for whatever work you're putting in. Quick little ask, if you're finding this content helpful, please do hit that subscribe and alert button below to make sure you get all of our podcast and audience growth content in future. Now, one thing I'll show you here is the cumulative tab here. So if I turn that on, it starts to add up. Now, this would be more useful for a podcast that's doing really heavy growth campaigns. We've not done a whole lot to grow our numbers in the last little while, concentrating on other things potentially, but you can see cumulative totals here. Maybe if I put that down to weekly, we might see more change. No, but you can see your total followers gained, total followers lost, Spotify net change, all of that stuff in there. So if you do want that cumulative number, then you can get that through here. And if you have some heavy campaigns going on, hopefully you'll start to see that cumulative growth right in there too. In terms of each platform, you can see how the platforms compare with each other, where maybe you should be spending your time or more time, and what really is working for your show individually. So that's that space. Right, let's dig in though to the recent episodes. So if I go into recent episodes, this can start to give us some really interesting data on what's working for the show and what's not. This is really where we can hone what kind of content we put out there. One of the big pieces of value that I see in a platform like Bumper is the fact that it brings together those platforms. It brings together Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Some really good data to help you see what content is working and what is not. Maybe what content is working on individual platforms as well. So if we look down here, first of all, you see the list of episodes. You can see each title. So these are the plays that each of these episodes have seen. You've got a published date, obviously. And nicely, it brings in the thumbnail as well. This is the thumbnail that I've put on YouTube. So if the episode is live on YouTube, it'll show the YouTube thumbnail. And if not, it'll just show the episode artwork like this. So let's dig into a couple of these. We've got some recent episodes. Dig in here and let's see what they have. So we've got some of the same stats that you saw for the overall podcast. We've got verified listeners, we've got all-time plays, and we've got listen and watch time as well. Again, you would have all-time downloads here if you had linked up your podcast host. Now here's where some things start to get quite interesting. Listen and watch time averages. These are data that you can get from Apple, Spotify, YouTube themselves, but I do really like the fact that you can bring them together into one place here so you can compare them. So we see that Spotify and Apple are pretty similar in terms of consumption. On average, people have consumed 2/3, 65% of this episode, both on Apple and on Spotify. But YouTube, only 5 minutes. So the legends are true. YouTube attention is a whole lot lower. Talking to Juiced from Bumper, these are pretty normal proportions. So seeing YouTube way, way lower is pretty common. Now, we have not optimized this show for video. This is actually just an audiogram type show. So we have Podcraft going out on YouTube just with the artwork behind the audio. We're just pushing the audio only. So we'd expect that quite a lot of people would turn off quite heavily. But it is really interesting to see, though, that 20% retention still for a lot of those people. So the people that find it on YouTube, actually 20%, 1 in 5, are still listening through the vast proportion of the episode. So it shows that audiograms, or just the audio and a still image, do work on YouTube still. Not half as good as it does on audio, of course, you can see here. Now, verified listeners, you get that graph. You can see how many people listened in the first couple of days. That's day 1, day 2, day 3. And you can see that we're getting a nice little trail there. So you can start to see what the trends are there. Similar with plays and similar with listen and watch time as well. Quick aside to say, all of the free content, just like this video that we put out, is supported by the products that we sell. One of which is the Podcraft Academy, which could help you to grow your podcast. So we offer a bunch of stuff in here. It's a coaching and execution community. Coaching to help you improve your podcast and execution to help you get the actual thing done. Some examples include our 4-minute feedback tool, which lets you post a little bit of your podcast to get direct feedback on. We give you really actionable stuff to improve your show. We've got Your Content Boss, which is all about accountability, helping you to actually get something out every single week. We've got the Podcast Health Check, a full health check for your podcast. We give a full report and audit that shows how to improve your show. Click Catalyst Title Clinic, so you can post your titles and really improve that searchability, discoverability, that SEO for your podcast. And of course, we've got a whole bunch of world-class education. You can see on the left here our full list of courses, our mastery series, like the Launch Mastery course right here. And we've got our growth mastery and our monetization mastery as well. Production with a bunch of different tools. We've got a load of skills in here as well as gear guides to take you through everything you need to podcast. Finally, we've got our affiliate sponsorship directory. Find that affiliate that will give you the first bit of income. Music library, tools, checklists, and templates, as well as our podcast business toolkit, which is a big Notion template to help you run your show. So if you want to check out the Academy, please do go over to thepodcasthost.com/academy. That's thepodcasthost.com/academy to join the community, join me and the rest of the team, and start growing your podcast. We'll see you there. One cool thing here is that you can do this on the other dashboard, the front end dashboard as well, as you can download an image of this. So if you are, as the bumper dashboard is really intended, if you're a network, you're a big media company, you need to be reporting on your performance, you can really easily get images out for these graphs to create reports around, or you can get the CSVs as well to create your own individual reports, bring your own data together. So that's really cool too. But how do we use this data to really figure out what content works? Well, let's consider the fact that we've got an episode here, how to scale and grow your audience. So we've got an episode around how to grow your audience for podcasting. We've retained 2/3 of all listeners on both Apple and Spotify, 15% on YouTube. Let's go and compare that to a different episode. Maybe I'll even just go to the third one. So this was the same series, and suddenly we have a lower retention. So it makes me think, I wonder if actually people were turned off because we did a series of 3. So maybe something around the fact that there was a series of 3, people who aren't concentrating on growing their audience perhaps lost interest by the last one. But that was mainly on Apple rather than Spotify. Or maybe it was just the fact that less people are interested in live events or email and engagement type of approaches for growth. So I might start to think about that in my own content. If I scroll down, let's look at a few others. We have one here that actually had a 72% retention. So that's a good bit above. That's another 7 or 8% beyond normal. But then it was lower on Spotify. So some strange little trends here that I might start to dig into. So maybe the Spotify audience is more sensitive to a particular type of intro that I actually had on this episode. And maybe Apple are more willing to put up with that intro and actually dig into the content. But I'd be interested in the fact that this is a higher retention. So what can we learn from these podcast intros? There's something about this episode that retained people for longer. So I would go back and listen to that one. This is the kind of thing that a lot of people don't do. So it's something that you can spend time doing, is go back and actually spending a day listening to old episodes, looking at the stats, really investigating. So just looking at the titles and the stats, you can start to see a few things. One is which titles bring in more people. So the all-time verified listeners gives you that indication. Which episodes have more listeners than average? Here's 133, how to scale your audience. So that growth topic did bring in more listeners than average. But actually, what does a podcast producer actually do? Lower, so only 86. That's on the lower end. Our episode titles are better than yours. Here's why, 142. Nice little curiosity type title. Maybe we should try more of those kinds of things. So those verified listeners, those verified playbacks here on the right actually give us a really good indication of what kind of content people are looking for. And then when we dig in and look at the listen and watch time averages, as shown by Bumper here, that can start to show us which episodes, what kind of content people actually like. We can say, all right, so there was a bit of a drop-off down to here. There was definitely a drop-off in the Spotify listens in the first minute. So could I make that intro better? I go back and listen to my intro, and I start to look at what I could do better. Whether I've done a good tease, I've given a good hook, maybe I put an advert in at the start of one, and that's actually reduced the listen and watch time average on an episode. But that's what this data is really good for. It gives you really good insight into how people are reacting to your content. Both just the front end, converting them, the title, the thumbnail, and then actually the content itself. That's down to listen and watch time. One nice tip as well that I've found in here is looking at the verified listeners and the playback stats for each episode. You can see on this episode, if I'm looking at what am I on here, it'll be about 3 months, I think. So around 3 months indeed. So April it came out, and that's through to the end of June. You can see that there's not a whole lot of downloads further down the line here. So the first week or so got kind of normal number of downloads, but there's not a lot of people delving back into this episode later in time. So those plays, 2 months, 3 months down the line, they're what give you an indication that this title is really clicky. Because if I go to another one, so let's go back to, I think it was that one there. No, I still didn't have a whole lot there, but I did see an episode earlier on, which I believe had more. Was it the scale one? Let me go back in here. And actually, yeah, this is a shorter period, obviously, because it's not been out for as long, but this does look to me like it's got more clickbacks, more plays, in the 1 month or so period. And if you compare these two, so looking at everything you need to know about making a podcast trailer, decent number of blips, decent number of plays, decent number of watch time further down the line here. Whereas if I go to the CTAs episode, you can see actually it's pretty bare. There's actually not much at all. So our audience are much more interested in trailers versus CTAs. So a podcast trailer kind of makes sense to me when I look at it. Podcast trailer, really obviously a podcast audience type topic, whereas CTAs, maybe we didn't make it quite as obvious in that title. That title's just not good enough. It's showing why CTAs are important to podcasters, actually. So that kind of data really does give you good insight into what worked and what didn't, and what you can learn from it. And you can see that reflected in the plays as well. So we've got double the plays, 285 on making a podcast trailer versus 140 for the CTAs. So you can see that it really pays off. If you can start to do more titles that really tie into this kind of topic or this kind of approach to your titles, you can convert way more listeners, bring them back into your back catalog to binge listen, as well as just getting more from your podcast. So that was the Bumper dashboard. I hope that gave you an idea of how you could use it to improve your show, track your stats, make sure campaigns are working nicely. Bumper do say it is definitely designed for networks, for media companies, for anyone who runs a whole range of podcasts and want to bring all that data together. And I will say, if you are a network, media company, and you want help with dealing with this data, figuring out what to do next, then that's exactly what we can help with. So we do coaching, consulting around exactly this. We can help you take that data and turn it into something actionable. So do get in touch if you want some help. You can go over to thepodcasthost.com/help. That's thepodcasthost.com/help. And that'll take you right into our forum to get in touch, and we'll see what we can do to help. All right, thank you for watching. I'll talk to you soon.